Hello again, Geoffrey. How are you?
Good day, Eric.
How have you been since I spoke to you last?
Life is good. The weather is still fine. And I'm looking forward to a very, very late winter. I like fall.
Fall is beautiful. When we last spoke, you had mentioned we were talking about listening, and I think maybe parenthetically you referenced a current event. The current event being the American government shutdown. You want to talk about that from your perspective?
Well, it was interesting. Apart from the fact that it was painful and horrible, it was interesting. Um, from the point of view of listening, there were so many different audiences involved. People were not actually talking. When people appear to be talking to each other, they weren't talking to each other, just to begin with. If you watched somebody on TV, and this, of course, is common to all of us, but everybody from Ted Cruz to President Obama was not just talking to an interviewer. They were talking to their constituents. They were talking to members of the public out there. And so you have the same thing that happens in all of politics, which is that the apparent audience is not always the real audience. Second thing that happened is that because this was going on, many of the people who were on TV, clearly, if you have two or three or four talking heads together, they weren't listening to each other either. What they wanted was to make their point, and they were quite happy to shout over each other. Thirdly, you had this huge disconnect between what large numbers of the population wanted and what some of the talking heads or the players were saying the population wanted. And you had to ask yourself, what were they looking at, and what were they listening to? Where were they getting their information? And if I sit back and look at the totality of it, we were looking at an interplay of values and a dysfunction of a society. And forgive me, it's absolutely classic and characteristic of an empire that's reaching its end. And one of the things about there's a wonderful woman called Sally Gerner who described what she called the S curve. When organizations or empires begin, there's a curve that goes down and up and down. They reach a point where they become very strong, and then they reach a critical point where they can either explode or revert back to a sort of a primitive version of what they had been, or something greater might emerge. And I think looking at the way people were talking from the point of view of what they were listening to, we're right at that point right now. We've got three tendencies happening in America at exactly the same time. We've got a huge reversion to the way things were, an attempt at authoritarianism, to get rid of whether it's blacks or gays or women. We've got a disintegration of the system as a whole, and we've got the promise of something absolutely marvelous that could emerge through more mindfulness, through more collaboration, through more cooperation, through more connectedness, through technology. And we've got all three things happening at the same time. Now, from the point of view of listening, it is fascinating to try and hear each of those currents in the voices of the people who are talking. Forgive me, but I regard the Tea Party as being a reversion to an idealized, primitive version of what they thought America might be. Forgive me, but that's what I think. The absolute clash of beliefs and values and issues seems to me to be an example of a sort of disintegration. And some of the wonderful comments and suggestions and contributions from people suggest that we're moving into something bigger, and maybe and even a different view of government. Now, forgive me, this is a very abstract philosophical riff, but from the point of view of how we listen to each other and how we listen to people who are not listening to each other, the near shutdown was fascinating.
It also reminds me of something you had mentioned in our previous conversation. When an important part of listening is it's about attitude, in that you need to be able to listen to people that maybe you don't like. And that seemed to be, is that part of the problem here?
Oh, absolutely. I criticize the Tea Party But if you think about it, if we just ignore any political group for a moment and look at the problem of debt, you know, we do have a problem of debt, and some of the people who are passionate about reducing that problem may not be going about it in a way that we would all approve, but oh Lord, there is an issue there that is absolutely critical to understand. And so I think this is a classic example in which people were so entrenched in their positions that it was difficult for them to even acknowledge that their opponents might just have something of value to say.
That's great. Geoffrey, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. Much appreciated.
Take care.